I hate colors and shapes. Ever since I took art class in the 2nd grade, I've held a vendetta against them because I didn't like the way yellow pentagons looked. You'd be shocked to see how scary they can be. But I've always thought to myself that not all shapes are bad. I mean, a gun is a shape. However, I've always found games to be a safe place where I can conceal my true feelings, which is why you'll probably find a snot rag in my copy of 3D World. So my outlook on shapes needs to be put into a game that also has shapes. Donkey Kong 94, too much ape. Captain Toad Treasure Tracker, too many vertices. Kirby, you know, I was gonna make some snotty remark on why he's pink, but I'm not gonna act like parts of me aren't pink either. Kirby is a series of platformers spanning several consoles and handhelds that continues to get brand new and exciting games to this day. And for the reason of one of his most exciting entries being released as a true jump for the series, as well as it being Kirby's 30th anniversary, I've decided that I want to take a look at everything this series has to offer. Okay, maybe not everything. I'll mostly be covering the main series of games, with two small exceptions being Kirby's Epic Yarn because of it being the first genuine Kirby game on a home console since Kirby 64, and Kirby Air Ride because it easily has the most history and development behind it for just a simple Kirby spin-off. But let's start where the universe began, the 80s. Now some of you might say, but the first Kirby game came out in the 90s, shouldn't we start with them? No, of course not. I have my priorities set on Urban Champion, thank you very much. Out of the NES came a plethora of actual games, something Atari can try to boast. This is where many of Nintendo's retro darlings were born, but this was a console, so these games could only be enjoyed with the complement of a ceiling. What if there was a handheld device that could capture the same magic that the consoles had? Taking all of this and cramming it onto something the size of my hopes and dreams was going to be difficult. So of course Nintendo decided to play God and made the Game Boy. Now this wasn't the world's first rodeo in terms of handheld entertainment. Rather, it was its first real one. The Microvision was a thing, but it was the Microvision. And the Game & Watch games are some of the most charming things I've seen all week, but come on, they're Game & Watch games. The Game Boy was the closest thing to replicating an actual console experience, so I think it's warranted to put it through something just as new and exciting as the games on home consoles. Yeah! Tetris and the Game Boy were a match made in heaven, and some of the most iconic things to come from their era. Tetris being a pack-in title for the system made it so that the Game Boy wouldn't just lure in kids, but just about everyone who had a conscience. And the Game Boy was known for more than just Tetris, it had Pokemon. Let's talk about Kirby. Kirby's Dreamland was the first Kirby game to make it out into the world. And yeah, this was the first Kirby game, alright. This game was developed by Masahiro Sakurai, who went on to develop the Super Smash Bros. Series, Kid Icarus Uprising, and probably a select portion of the universe. This man is a Nintendo icon nowadays, and he got to start out here as the father of Kirby. When going into this game, Sakurai wanted to design a game that anybody can understand and enjoy. As a result, this game is extremely simple and easy to go through, but that doesn't really matter much to me in a circumstance like this. Difficulty is never something I downplay a game for the most part. Have you seen what I play in my spare time? I found that a game doesn't have to be difficult in order to be fun, but it shouldn't be mindlessly easy either. I should at least have to pay attention to what I'm doing in order to succeed, and this game is great at doing just that. This game is a simple 2D platformer, but not to a fault. Sure, it can be beaten in less than an hour quite easily, but for the hour that I do spend trying to beat it, I am fully aware and attentive of what exactly is going on here. And as to what is going on here, a big penguin stole a bunch of food and the tools for harvesting it, and you must defeat him and restore peace to Dreamland. And that's it. It's a fine story for a Game Boy game, but I can't help but find it funny that a series that grew to house eldritch monsters very consistently started out as a game where a penguin steals a bunch of food. But it does at least give me some motivation. Some Game Boy games just like to play Ding Dong Ditch. However, the combat in the game is also surprisingly simple, even for a Kirby game. When you swallow an enemy, you can either spit them out or make them a part of your diet. There aren't that many options here. But let's not forget, you can fly around as well, becoming a large puff in the air that can fly all over the level design. And the bosses you fight using your abilities are iconic in design and fun to put down to size. As I said before, this game isn't hard, and neither are the bosses, but their large size and range of movement patterns are fun to get used to. Oh, and there are only 5 levels, did I forget to mention that? I already said that this game was short, but only having 5 point A to point B levels is a bit embarrassing, even if they are all decent in design. Although you can spice up your second playthrough with extra mode. Some of the enemies are replaced by stronger ones, the Waddle Dees like to screw with you now, and the bosses this time around will make sure you die on the spot. It's a really good mode that makes this game a lot more replayable, and helps scratch the itch of someone who did think this game was far too easy. But without a doubt, the game's most impressive accomplishment was deciding Kirby should be white. Basically, Kirby's color was intended to be pink right at the start by the choice of Sakurai, but Miyamoto wanted him to be yellow. And not only is that wrong, it's stupid too. And the box art was being created while they were bickering about the color, so the person who drew this just decided to make him white because he's white in the game. That man single-handedly stopped World War III. In a conclusive notion, this is one of the first games I think of when the prospect of Game Boy crosses my mind, but why? It isn't all that much to look at, and it's quite underwhelming to play. As a counterpoint to that, I don't care. This game had a lot of thought in its level-to-level gameplay. All of its enemies and bosses screamed personality, and its extra mode gave it a reason to be played multiple times, which are fair enough inclusions to warrant a spot in my memory banks. The gameplay itself is bare bones, there's no getting around that. But even with the strong limitations of the Game Boy, it was able to add all of these little trinkets that made the game so much more interesting to play and discuss. But I also can't deny that Kirby's Adventure on the NES has much more polish. Kirby's Adventure is far more complex than his handheld counterpart, with many more mechanics and nuances held throughout. And Kirby's finally pink. I haven't been holding this sign for nothing. The Game Boy game was simple to the point of it nearly being at fault, but Kirby's Adventure is probably one of the largest games on the NES, which is quite a bit of a jump to go through. While Kirby's Dreamland started the series, this is where I feel that the series was truly born, as many things introduced in this game would go on to be series staples. The story of the game isn't that much, which does reflect the games that are released today, but that isn't much of a bad thing. A game doesn't need to have a story if it doesn't need one. Some types of games need stories, like RPGs. They need to keep you motivated throughout your playthrough, except for Miitopia. I'll let Miitopia get off with anything. In this game's story is a simple MacGuffin quest where you have to find all the pieces of the Star Rod. But what I like about this game and the rest of the Kirby series is that sometimes right at the end of the game, you're thrown in for a loop. In this game, you find out that King Dedede was trying to keep the Star Rod apart because of Nightmare, who's summoned once the Star Rod is whole. And surprisingly, the whole Hell Demon thing would also continue throughout the series. But you know what else would continue throughout the series? I do, but you probably wouldn't care. The level select. See, I told you wouldn't care. This is the first Kirby game to have an honest-to-goodness level select screen. The first game kind of forgot how to do one of those, and tried to make up for it with nonsense. These were the only words I could come up with. This game takes that nonsense and applies it to the liveliness of human existence. Step aside, Float Island's Butter Building called. All of the locations in this game hold a certain stigma in my mind, because it isn't like these areas were born out of pure creative genius. They just hold a certain positivity to them. It adds a ton of charm to the game, not to mention that it also discerns the specific layout of a Kirby game. When I think about the structure and pace of a Kirby game, I don't think of the levels themselves, but how they're laid out in an order, which is why these level select screens are so important. They pretty much force you to remember how you played through the game, where you started out, and where it eventually ended. And for that reason, I'm gonna rate them all on a scale of 1 to 7. Before you ask, it was one of today's lucky numbers. It was either that or 293. As for this game, I think it gets a 5.5 out of 7. It has a ton of personality, and because you can run around it like it's its own personal mini level, it's kinda cute. Each of the levels are vivid enough to the point where I can remember each one. The acronym of Roy G. Biv backwards appeals to the second grader from art class in me, and there's enough stuff to do outside of the levels that acts as a little distraction, which I'll touch on later. Although, while it's apparent that the good stuff is really good, there could be a lot more done that would make it truly great. But honestly, it's not that bad of a first attempt at a level select. It serves its purpose, it looks nice, and doubles as a meaningless distraction, all being good qualities for a level select. But some uncivilized people might find the levels themselves to be more entertaining, and I won't discourage them. The levels in this game are really fun, and that should have just about met my 13 val quota. But they do have a bit more to them than the levels in Kirby's Dreamland. For one, they aren't endangered. There are 7 completely different levels in the game, each having quite a few stages that are around the same length as a typical level in Dreamland. By the basic laws of math, that should equate to more fun. And the stages are also fun to play through. Shocking. They aren't too long and they aren't too short, and each level has just the right amount of stages. Sometimes you might even find a little switch that can give access to a few hidden goodies within the level select. But that leads to the only thing I can point out that is definitively lacking within these stages: a reason to explore the level. Sure, there might be a switch every once in a while, but they're few and far between. There are some health options and extra lives that can be poked and prodded, but this is an already easy game, so they aren't exactly necessary. However, I don't find this to be a major problem. Because this level design philosophy is used well, I feel that the faster and less methodical nature of this game's stages makes it stand out in my mind compared with the rest of the Kirby pantheon. I'm not saying that this is better than the later Kirby formula, because it isn't, but it gives adventure more of an identity to me. And with the decision of Kirby's ethnicity out of the minds of the developers, this game was also able to build up the concept of copy abilities, which would become the main gimmick of the series going forward. Most good people know it by now, but Kirby has the ability to swallow his foes and mimic their abilities, and aside from that being rather morbid, that's awesome. This concept would be the foundation that the Kirby franchise would go to build itself upon. It's hard to imagine where Kirby would be without his iconic sword ability, fire ability, hammer ability, and sleep ability, the best one. People do say your favorite favorite things are the things you'll never get. But like in the first game, as a compliment to his copy abilities, he can fly. Look where that got Icarus. The copy abilities in this game are nothing crazy. There are 25 of them, and they each have one move assigned to them. Although some of them are nearly useless, this is the NES, I can excuse that kind of nonsense for now. But we're all forgetting about the minigames found in the level select, like the godsend that is Crane Fever. It's a claw machine minigame, but it might be breaking out into something. But what about Quick Draw? I mean, I took art class in the 2nd grade. It's a shootout minigame. Is that a shape? And finally, Egg Catcher. Basically, swallow the poultry, not the uranium. That's some good life advice. All in all, the minigames are fine, they're just too short to be anything substantial. Now you might be saying, gee, this game sounds great. I sure hope its presentation isn't butchered by the console it's on. Oops. This game was on the NES, and being one of the most complex games on one of the most primitive consoles, yeah, this didn't go over too well. However, I will say it's better than you'd expect, depending on what you expected. The game has a significant slowdown problem because of the game's complexity, which comes off as a bit of a hindrance. Well, it's a good thing that's the only thing wrong with it. So it's a good thing that a remake was made for the GBA under the name Kirby's Nightmare in Dreamland, which makes a lot more sense given the circumstances of the plot. And I'd say this is the definitive way to play the game. It has upgraded graphics, some extra modes, and the slowdown is no more. Other than that, it's the exact same game, just with a better personality. But the 3D Classics remake is nothing to sneeze at either. It at least deserves a cough. This is the original game, just with a kind of cool 3D effect. I just wish it got even more of an upgrade because practically every 3D Classics title is enhanced by 3D to the extreme. Have you seen Urban Champion? But this gets points for being the only real game to be brought into the line of 3D Classics, or let me reiterate, have you seen Urban Champion? This is a neat little title that fixes the slowdown of the original and shows all that it was envisioned to be while being competent in 3D. So this game was pretty great, and it evolved Kirby from a half-hour novelty on the Game Boy to a franchise that was worth investment. That would explain the empty wallet. The levels were great, the story was simple but noteworthy, the level select, need I say more? And the remakes were also fun interpretations of the original, each with their own spin on things. This game also set the stage for future titles, with all of its details being passed down from generation to generation, with its impact on the series even being somewhat visible on modern entries. Although it's clear that the series was just getting started at this point, and Kirby was still in his Peach Fuzz era. But this is still one of the best games on the NES by a mile, as it's one of the only games on the system that pushed the limits of what the console could do, and is a true masterpiece for its time. So how do you improve the series, coming from a game that practically defines anything and everything going forward? Well, here's the thing, you don't. That isn't to knock Dreamland 2, but this isn't exactly an incredible leap forward for the series, which I find to be very strange because this game sets the tone and style that the next few games would follow. But for every step forward this game takes, it almost feels like the game is being set back. For example, the Animal Buddies. Rick, Kine, and Koo are some of the most iconic things to come from this game. They give the abilities an extra bit of spunk, while also having advantages of their own. Rick is the land rodent, and is probably the least useful of them all. Now I love this guy, he's cute and adorable. There are things I cannot deny, but let's be real. Kirby can walk in the ground, and Rick can walk in the ground, just a little bit faster. I don't see much of an advantage here. And why would I want to go faster when the enemies in this game come out of nowhere because of screen crunch, which is more so the fault of the Game Boy than anything. He can walk on ice without slipping, but that doesn't come up all too often, so I'm sorry, I don't like using Rick that much. But Koo and Kine are much better. Koo can fight against strong wind, and Kine can go through currents, which are great advantages. No, they don't come up extremely often, but they sure do come up a lot more than ice. They're also great with moving through their respective terrain, even more than Kirby. So why did Rick get stiffed? Kine and Koo are so useful in the game that it makes Rick look useless, which is unfair because his combinations with some abilities are quite useful in combat. Speaking of which, the combinations of the Animal Buddies and the abilities are a cool concept, but there are only 7 base abilities to combine with, and keep in mind that not all of them are winners. But I do think there are enough good ones to counteract the ones that are just okay. The Animal Buddies are fine in this game, but they aren't that great, and I prefer more abilities than different ability combinations. I just got back from Truth Convention 2022, and I got this personalized letter from them, and they said, I needed to know, or something like that. I wonder what it says. I just lost everything I've ever cared about. The level select in this game, it's not bad, but I'd be lying if I said it was good. Instead of having separate little fun things to do in between levels like an adventure, it's just the level select. You're telling me I got excited for nothing? It doesn't even look nice. The number of levels from world to world keeps on growing, making it feel like the game drags on more the further you get into it. And every single level is right next to each other. Where's the fun in that? This is a sham of a level select, and should be ashamed to be mentioned in the same discussion as adventures. 2 out of 7. Other than that, we have, The first collectible in the series is the Rainbow Drop. It also happens to be the worst collectible in the series. This is one of the most frustrating collectibles to get in any game I have ever played. There are only 7 of them, but they're such a pain. For most of them, you need to use both the animal buddies and abilities, and it isn't always clear which ones you need to use. This is the first world of the game. How is I supposed to know that they wanted me to use the Parasol ability with Rick? These blocks don't come up that much in the game, so do they expect me to know what the blocks stand for when they introduce themselves? I don't care what anyone else says. Those are just a bunch of dots. But these blocks are much more recognizable as the game goes on, and you start getting used to the given abilities and animal buddies. But then level 6. This is the worst one. Even after you know what to do, this one is so complicated and convoluted, and if you make one mistake, you have to do it all over again, which goes for the rest of them as well, because if you screw up once and lose an animal buddy to a faulty jump, you're gonna have to go all the way back to get them, and then try to get back to where you were. And what's worse is that the rainbow drops are required to get the real ending of the game. I know I wanted Adventure to have some sort of collectible, but this game would probably be better without it being infected by what I should refer to as a diseased limb. I can get past everything else in this game. Yes, even the level select, but this makes simply completing the game a painful chore, and it's honestly the only reason I don't come back to the game as often as I should. But what do I like about this game? I wasn't prepared for that question. This game has level design just as good as Adventure, maybe even better at certain times, except for this one auto-scrolling section where you have to get lucky or die, basically Russian roulette with a vengeance. And I know I ragged on it 82 syllables ago, but what the Rainbow Drop does add is a reason to explore the level, and hunting them down forces you to get used to the locations of specific abilities and animal buddies. It doesn't forgive its list of cardinal sins, but I'll take what I can get. Also, it might be just me, but this is the hardest Kirby game for me to simply beat. This is a Kirby game, and I don't typically expect a real challenge, but this game made it so that I couldn't just run through without a care. Some enemies come out of nowhere, so you have to keep on your toes because you never know when a Waddle Dee might strike. It could be any second now. Even with the later boss battles, you have to take note of their attacks and strategize around them, rather than going all out without fearing for your health and safety. And it isn't like it's an extremely hard game, but the added challenge gives it more of a personality, because what else was going to do that? The naked woman in level 5-5? How did this happen? The story is also there, and it kicks off the Dark Matter trilogy. I just wish there was a bit more plot, because with everything that's going on here, not many things are made very clear. But this game is still a great one, and definitely an improvement over Dreamland 1. It isn't as good as Adventure, but for a Game Boy game, it kept the Kirby formula intact while adding so many new things to the series, even if those things are short-lived. However, I don't think this game left much of an impact compared to almost every single other retro Kirby game. Dreamland was the one that started it all. Adventure ironed out all the mechanics of Dreamland, while adding a lot of its own things that would go on to be series mainstays, and I haven't talked about them yet, but later Kirby games added so much to the Kirby formula that it kinda makes Dreamland 2 look pathetic. I must restate that this game is great, despite its gaping flaws, but this game could have not happened, and the series wouldn't be much different. Sure, the animal buddies would be wiped from existence, but I can live without fictional birds, I'll be fine. And the other cool things that this game did add were easily outdone by future entries, which begs the question, why would I need to revisit this game if everything it did has been done better somewhere else? At the time, sure, this is a portable equivalent of Adventure, and it did a fine job at that, but this game came out in the era of the SNES, and while it seemed likely that getting a Kirby game on that console would be a priority, they threw out a Game Boy sequel instead. Not like that's a bad thing, but it contributes to the point that this game is probably the most underappreciated game that came out during the retro era of Kirby. But another reason why this game was massively overshadowed is that the Kirby game that did end up releasing on the SNES was, and still is, widely considered to be the best game in the series. Kirby Superstar is the first Kirby game that I consider to be exceptional. Now yes, Adventure is great as well, but this game is such a monumental leap for the Kirby series that it makes a lot of other games in the series look as primitive as a fetus. Not that there aren't any better games in the series, but this is the first Kirby game that's influence would go on to inspire game design not just in the Kirby series, but also in Super Smash Bros., in which it took the mantra of a game being simple on the surface, but having so many layers underneath that more experienced players can unravel. This game contains 8 minigames as advertised, which if we're talking in Mario Party standards, that's pretty low. But most of these have some meat on their bones, and are both replayable and lengthy, which explains why Pirate's Hunt for Blackbeard's booty didn't live up to expectations. See, the minigames in Superstar aren't minigames, they're mini-games. I swear there's a difference. A minigame is something like Bowl Over from Mario Party. Depending on which side you're on, the goal is to either knock down the opposing team or try to stay alive. It's quick, simple, and done within a minute or so. I've chewed gum for longer than it takes to play this. But the minigames in Superstar are like really well polished versions of Kirby's Dreamland. They're full-on games, if albeit shorter than your average Kirby game. Heck, one of them is just a recreation of Dreamland with better graphics. Speaking of which, Spring Breeze. It sure is. This game is practically just Dreamland with the added perks of the new mechanics that Superstar brings to the table, and acts as an introduction to the rest of the games in the collection. You can immediately tell the difference between these two games, not just because one of them looks like puke, but because this one brings all the modern innovations of Kirby together at the same time and shoves it into a well done remake, except for a level select. Although in a game as short as this, I could do without one of them for now, but they better get their act together next time. However, I feel like the most important thing this game introduced is the birth of copy abilities. Now, were copy abilities in previous games? Yes, but did every single one of them have a hat to go with them? I didn't think so. And now when you use an ability, you don't just have one move to go for, you have several moves to attack with. This opens a world of possibilities for how to use the abilities, and it gives more of a reason to pick them up compared to basic and bland over there. This might seem like a small step towards greatness, but it makes the gameplay loop of Kirby so much more interesting. And using this in a remake of Dreamland, yeah, this is a bit too overpowered. This game wasn't designed with the copy abilities in mind, so going through this game is even easier than it already was on the Game Boy. But it's supposed to be the introduction to the game, so I can't excuse the easiness on display here. Although the game does make some odd omissions, like Castle Lololo not even being present as a stage, and the final stage of the original game had a boss rusher source before fighting Dedede, but Spring Breeze just throws you right into the action. But at the end of the day, it's still Dreamland, so I still find it enjoyable. Gourmet Race is okay. Personally, I'm a bit of a picky eater. This one's made of paper. You just go through a few levels and collect as much food as possible while trying to make it to the end as quickly as possible. But I'll be honest, it's probably my least favorite out of the main games on offer here. I just barely ever play it when stacked on the decision of playing this or an actual game. Yet this also happens to be the most famous minigame in the series, going on to be referenced by countless titles, while the game's main theme is still getting remixed to this day. And no, I don't know why that's the case. It isn't like this one offends me, but it irks me that the most talked about minigame in this package is a 3-level race where you compete with a penguin for food. Like I can't do that in the real world. Dynablade is cool though. Imagine Spring Breeze, but all the levels are original and built with the copy abilities in mind, which makes this by default quite a bit better than Spring Breeze, and I can respect that. But get this, there's a level select screen. Finally, the developers understand my needs. It isn't there all too much though, and it's so minuscule that I don't even think it's worth an actual score, but it does get points for looking nice. Kirby's Dreamland 2 could only dream of that kind of praise. However, the mode itself, as I said, is just a better version of Spring Breeze with a different kind of bird at the end. But the Great Cave Offensive, aside from having the best stage in Smash Bros, yeah, I said it, I'm brave, is also one of the most unique experiences from this era of Kirby. This game follows an exploratory fashion as you go around a semi-open area, hunting for different treasures. Although the area isn't truly an open world, and there's still quite a bit of a linear path to follow, but I feel like an open world 2D Kirby game wouldn't work very well in practice anyway. Oh, we'll get to this. But I think it's a perfect blend between exploration and having to follow a set path. There are 4 different areas in the game, each being connected by minecart, and you can go back anytime in order to get any treasure you missed, so you're never locked out of getting a specific treasure. There are even some bosses every once in a while to break the pace, like this one that mimics a turn-based RPG, or at least the good kind. So no, I still don't see how this is offensive. Meta Knight's Revenge is a really fun one, or at least the Grammys thought so. It's a more fast-paced kind of game, where you find yourself fighting against the clock to stop Meta Knight, who first appeared as a boss in Adventure, as he tries taking over Dreamland. And apparently, the reason he wanted to take over Dreamland was because he believed the citizens were too lazy. Honestly, that's a pretty good reason for staging a coup. In this game, you travel across the Halberd, with you even getting blown off the ship, only to be rescued by Dynablade. That's some cool continuity. The game is also spiced up by some dialogue inclusions from the ship's crew, as you get their point of view of Kirby's attack. Yeah, as if I already didn't sympathize enough with the anime. Every now and then, you come into contact with some pretty creative bosses, ending off with a sword fight with Meta Knight. And it's all over once you ride off into the sunset after destroying the last hope of Dreamland ever being reformed to a working society that's more prepared to prevent possible disasters which would build up the society to its peak performance. When did Kirby games get so political? And finally, Milky Way Wishes, the best one. So the Sun and Moon are fighting. Yes, I too have seen 6 PM. And the goal of the game is spouted to us by a brain tumor with the Jester hat, as we now need to have the Galactic Nova stop them from fighting. This game is all about creative level design and aesthetics. Right from the first level to the last, every single one of them are creative in their execution and design, choosing to remix several assets from previous games. It takes everything from Spring Breeze, Dynablade, the Great Cave Offensive, and Meta Knight's Revenge, and puts it all into this amalgamation of ideas. Every game in Superstar practically leads up to this one, so it's fair that it's the last main one you unlock. But one interesting choice that this game adds is that you can't swallow your enemies to receive their copy abilities. You have to find their copy essences, which are seen quite consistently throughout the adventure. I don't have much to say about it though. It honestly doesn't shake up the formula too much to the point where it makes that much of a big difference. And once you get to the end of the story, Marx the brain tumor betrays us. And I think I figured out why that is. You see, if you take the letters of Marx and you rearrange them, they spell Axerm. which explains so much. But most important of all, it has a level select. I told you this was the best one. Now, as supplemental modes, you have the arena, where you refight every boss in the game. Same Ride Kirby, which is just a more dramatic remake of Quick Draw. And Megaton Punch, where we can cause natural disasters. This is just blatant public endangerment. And they're all fine. I especially enjoy arena from time to time because the bosses in this game are really fun. Now, all of that should probably cover the basis of everything in this game. And now I can move on to the next. Oh yeah, Kirby Superstar Ultra is the best remake in the series, hands down. It focused on making everything this was into something even better. It did some touch-ups on the original game, and fixed the little things like making the enemy placement less sporadic, and making everything more manageable overall. It even added some more modes of its own like the True Arena and Meta Nightmare Ultra, which are some awesome additions. This is the best way to play Superstar nowadays, because with the original, what was I gonna do, take it for a walk? I don't have that kind of problem with this one. But let's not undersell the original game here. Both of these games are incredible feats. The original game brought so many new mechanics and concepts into the series. If not for this game, the series might not be the same one we look at today. While Adventure started the series to me, Superstar took it to the next level by expanding on everything that game established. It isn't my favorite game in this series, but I can see where most are coming from when they say that. There isn't a single bad minigame here, and at its worst, I thought a minigame was just okay. So I think this game should be commended for that, being a Kirby game that contributed to the series being as good as it is today. Now let's talk about a game that did none of that. Kirby's Dreamland 3 is a game that not many people talk about, and is in this sort of space where it simply exists, even though I think it happens to be the best game in the series so far. I can explain. This game is just a better version of Dreamland 2. Better level design, better collectibles, better graphics, and a better level select. Oh heck yeah! Mind you, the level select isn't great, but an improvement is an improvement. You can't walk around in this one, but it looks nice, so I won't complain. Each level is represented by a single picture, and each stage takes place on a location of the map. And most of the time, the location on the map seeps into the gameplay and mood of it all. You get to level 3 and you have to work all the way up to this huge pyramid, which you eventually do go through as a stage. And look at level 5, where you see this stupid looking castle in the distance where the final boss rests. Each level paints a literal picture of the journey you'll have getting from here to here. Although I would like to nitpick that because they didn't draw dotted lines between the levels, I find it hard to navigate. Which way is diagonal again? It just snaps you into place. Why not do something like Donkey Kong Country, which has a very similar setup to this game in terms of its level select. And I do miss the old style level select just a bit, but this is deserving of at least a 5 out of 7. Although I find the most notable part of the game to be the stylized graphics, because it might just be the most unique style the Kirby series has ever gone through. It goes through this pastel, washed out watercolor look, and aside from it being something I want to hang up on my wall, I think it gives the game its own merit, and sets it apart from the other Kirby game on the SNES. Now while this does look really clean, this has more of a personality. It's the first thing that comes to mind when a combination of these three things happen. And the collectibles in this game, the hard stars, are much better than Rainbow Drops ever were, but they still aren't that good. And like with Dreamland 2, it's also the reason I don't revisit the game every weekend to check on its feelings. You get them from completing specific missions within the levels, which are sometimes a bit too specific. Around half of them are obvious, and the goal can be discerned using some good old context clues. Then with the other half, at least Google's got my back. For example, this spring monster is just existing on a platform in some random room, and nothing is told about what this thing is or what it wants. Apparently, this is what it wanted. That's messed up. This game was much more enjoyable on my second playthrough when I understood what these things wanted. There are even some cool ones like freezing Metroids for Samus or rebuilding Rob the Robot. These do have some merit, but because so many of them are so strange in their methods, I'd rather them not be here at all. And dear god, the minigames. Once every world, to get a hard star, you need to play some sort of memory game, and they're horrible. They're all memory games, and they only give you a split second to memorize anything, and then you're on your own. I'd almost prefer to be confused than to be frustrated out of my mind, because I already get enough of that in my day-to-day life. Couldn't you rob me next week? And the hard stars don't really have a variety all too often in how you get them. And no, I don't get excited when the flowers are a different color. That was a long time ago. But I can at least handle the hard stars. They don't kill the flow of the gameplay too much, unlike the diseased limb. They just put something forward that I need to keep in mind when trying to go for completion. And the animal buddies are back. Oh look, I'm already uninterested. But surprisingly enough, I really like them this time around, which is probably because there are quite a few of them that are added. And because there are so many of them, I don't feel like we're being robbed of abilities. Even if the depth of the abilities from Superstar didn't return, the combinations made with some of the new animal buddies were still really fun to use. But I will complain that sometimes their abilities are required to get some hard stars, which is annoying when you just want to stick to one good ability combination. But that's more the fault of me just having too much fun. And they even gave Rick the ability to climb walls. They truly did everything to make up for their blunders in Dreamland 2. But the plot of Dreamland 2 continues in this game as the force of dark matter is back at it again, being evil and stuff. He corrupts many of the bosses in the land, which can only be purified classified by collecting the area's heart stars, and at the end of the game, when dark matter is defeated, Zero is formed, shown to be the leader of all dark matter. And this is probably the most violent any of these games get. It isn't only the fact that he's a giant creepy eyeball, but he bleeds himself out to attack you. And when you finally get it over with, his iris is ripped out and then he starts chasing you. I knew that sounded familiar. It's a fine plot, but like with previous games, it's nothing I'm gonna be jumping out of my seat about. It's just a rehash of Dreamland 2, with a few more plot details that make it more enjoyable. Like the opening cutscene that, get this, explains the plot. Wow, I thought it was gonna tell me my rights. But if I might take you back to 1046 words ago, even though I think it happens to be the best game in the series so far, I can explain. I haven't brought that reasoning to light just yet, but that's for a reason. This game isn't perfect, and neither was I according to my English teacher. But it's just to show that even if there is a lot wrong with the game, it doesn't mean that it can't be great. It just has some improvements to get to. And this game is a great example of that, because the level design itself is great and has some of the best atmosphere in the series. Most of the time, when I pick up the game, its gameplay loop is so addictive to me, even if it does have its problems. And once I played it again and again, knowing all of its secrets and Heartstar locations, it finally clicked with me. I understood what the game designers were trying to do, even if they tripped up in a few places. Even if Superstar had more of an impact on the series, I think I prefer this game because of how more simple and likable the game gets over time. It just takes a bit of warming up to. Oh, and Gooey's here too. I'll put him on the list. And now for a brief history lesson on the life and times of the Nintendo 64, because I know people like ghost stories. The Nintendo 64 was the first console made by Nintendo to display 3D images. People might say that was the Virtual Boy, but that was only the first torture device they created. We aren't talking about this kind of 3D, we're talking about this kind of 3D. And this was huge for Nintendo, as some of the most iconic and important game releases in history were on this console. While the Sony PlayStation sold more than double of how many Nintendo 64s were sold, it didn't have the new Tetris. The PlayStation was far more popular than the Nintendo 64, but nowadays it seems to be quite the opposite. The Nintendo 64 is praised for bringing so many franchises into the third dimension, crafting entirely new grounds for some that would eventually grow into what we have today. The staying power of PlayStation for most of its core titles wasn't as strong. Like at the most, I care about 2 of these. But iconic game after iconic game arose, and yet no 3D Kirby game was in sight, aside from a Kirby racing game that ended up not releasing. So late in the life of the N64, when it was hooked up to a feeding tube, we finally got the Kirby game that we'd all been waiting for. Where's the Z-axis? We wait this long in the rise of 3D gaming, and Kirby's too scared to make the jump? Kirby would have no problems running in 3D. It's probably an even simpler conversion than that of Mario and Zelda. Unlike those, you can keep the gameplay exactly the same, with all of the abilities and mechanics of prior games staying intact. This game would have been perfect for 3D, and it would have been another monumental title that people hail in the same name as Ocarina of Time or GoldenEye. But instead, people don't talk about this game all too often, and it's usually shafted to the side when people talk about the Nintendo 64's biggest and best games. This game didn't live up to expectations from a standpoint on when it released, but it's also the best retro Kirby game. Nintendo, why do you do this to me? And it is weird, because I feel like it takes a lot of things from previous titles. These games make up the Dark Matter trilogy, all having the same general villain as a threat. When I played this game as a kid, I was confused out of my mind because what the heck is going on here? But as I've matured over the years, I now understand what this game was going for. I don't know why this game didn't click with me when I was 6, but this game has the style and charm that not many Nintendo 64 games hold. And I've only been able to see that style as a positive thing now that I've come to appreciate Nintendo's history of consoles. I used to think this game looked like garbage, but for an N64 game, this is the best looking game on the system to me. Everything might seem super simplistic, but the game manages to capture several different atmospheres, and some of the level designs here are just flat out pretty. This is partially because of what kind of 2D it tries to emulate. You might be set on a fixed path, but the camera rotations make it look like it has so much more depth. While the environments aren't graphically intensive, this game is really appealing to the eyes, or at least as much as an N64 game can be. So it does look like garbage. And if you were wondering, the level select in this game is fine, I guess. It isn't offensive, but I wouldn't say it's as good as others. You just select a world and select the level where you want to go. Honestly, I don't have the strength to either carry on talking about it in good faith or disrespect it, so 4 out of 7. But the thing that I love this game for the most are the ability combinations. The games that carry them had been steadily improving the combinations bit by bit, which is fair to say that they were only used in 2 games. And they were only alongside the animal buddies, which somewhat limited the possibilities of how creative they could be. You combine a rock and a bird, card and you're only gonna get so far. I tried it once and all I got was a report that claimed animal abuse. In this game, Kirby can do it all by himself, and by simply using the basic abilities for combinations, you can make some really interesting things. This is how you do ability combinations right. They're all creative and well thought out, and most importantly, fun to use. I feel like the animal buddy combinations did their job, but combining different basic elements are way more fun to mess around with. Throughout the game, I try to experiment with different combinations to see what new things I might discover, because seldom do I find one of them underwhelming or unfun to use. It's a great gimmick for the game to get behind. Its uniqueness carries throughout the game, and when you do discover them all, it's still fun to put that knowledge to use in combat against both the common enemies and bosses. However, some may have complaints as to how you use them to obtain the game's main collectible in the game, the crystal shards. In most levels, you'll need a specific ability or ability combination in order to receive one of the crystal shards in the level. The other two are usually hidden somewhere else throughout the level, but those are fine. It's these ones that most people complain about, but you should know by now that I'm not like most people. Does this look like most people do? I personally like this part of the gameplay, because while it does cause you to backtrack for some abilities, it forces you to use those abilities in practice, perhaps for the first time. And hey, at least it's color-coded to the abilities you need to use. I'll use any chance to bully this game into submission. But all of the crystal shards are necessary for getting the ability to fight the final boss. Let's talk about this. As I said earlier, this is the final entry in the Dark Matter trilogy, and this is the most competent plot in the series so far. In every other Kirby game, it was either DDD just screwing around or something else showed up and did an evil thing. Except for some of the minigames in Superstar, those are pretty competent too. Instead of invading Popstar, they decided to mix things up a little, with Ripple Star falling under the control of Dark Matter, and a fairy girl from that planet descends down to Popstar, while the crystal shards fall from the sky into different areas in different worlds. Now you need to collect the crystal shards to prepare for the fight against evil at the end of the game. That was the plot. But while simple, I'd say that it was the first plot of a Kirby game that made sense and acted as an existing goal throughout the game. And there are also a few other notable details, like how level 5, Superstar, is a post-apocalyptic version of Earth, with its own factories controlled by unknown beings. I'm taking this as a sign. And once you reach the end of the game and defeat the supposed final boss, if you collected all of the crystal shards, it will reveal the true final boss of the game to be 02, a creepy demonic hell monster, which confirms that this is indeed a Kirby game. I got worried for a second there. And it also might have been one of the factors why this is the only Kirby game to be rated T. That, on top of the brutal acts of murder you can commit with the ability combinations. This game has so much going for it. It has a personality, alright motives, and a slightly interesting backstory. Well, that just sounds like me. But it's honestly one of the best Nintendo 64 games I've ever played. So it offends me that not nearly enough people talk about this game. Dreamland 3 and Kirby 64 are held in a certain place of quality to most people who are at least familiar with them. But it's just that nobody talks about them, and if they do, it's about the ability combinations from 64, which is warranted, but I feel like these games should be held in a much higher regard. Both of these games are somewhat overshadowed by others, and Dreamland 2, I think I'm sitting on it. But nothing I say or do can change thousands of opinions, and I have to accept the fact that I can't go up to the homeless man down the street and ask him what his thoughts were on the soundtrack of Kirby 64. But as a setup for what's to come after this game, we wouldn't get another mainline title on home consoles until more than a decade later, and we kept getting handheld supplements to hold us out until Return to Dreamland released. I've dubbed the 2000s as the weird era of Kirby, and nothing more. Yeah, if people ask when I was born, I just tell them it was during the weird era of Kirby. And I'd say the weird era began with Kirby Air Ride. This is one of the strangest Kirby games to discuss and play because of its surprising quality and strange development history. The project got its start on the Nintendo 64 under the name Kirby's Air Ride, and not much was known about it outside of some press events like Space World. From what it looked like, it seemed to be quality, albeit very different from the final product. So the game was cancelled, but behind the scenes, they took out a letter and an apostrophe, and everything turned out well in the end. Kirby Air Ride is a very interesting game to bring into the conversation because this game left a very silent impact for Sakurai's work on Super Smash Bros. This is the most similar game to Smash Bros. In the Kirby series, which is quite surreal. I mean, it's a racing game, and a Kirby one at that. How good could it really be? This game gives me the willies. It's no Mario Kart, but that can be said about most other games too. This is a very good kart racer that I find myself coming back to often. It has lots of modes, a surprising level of content behind them, and it just freaks me out. Why this game is so good is beyond me, but maybe I can at least try to dissect its qualities to see why it's so enamoring. Air Ride is the main mode of the game, and is where you learn the ropes of the game's mechanics. It's a racing game, but a very curious one at that. You only use one button to control Kirby in this game, along with the control stick for some obvious thumb-turning action. And while it might seem really simple, it just highlights how difficult the game is compared to a normal racing game. Because you don't usually think about what button to press, you can just focus on the non-stop action and pace of the tracks. And these tracks are more twisty than my digestive system, system, so there's a lot to look out for. There is so much to account for in these tracks. There are copy abilities, speed boosters, tight corners, which can be insane sometimes, but it isn't even just the tracks. The karts here are bonkers, for better or for worse. I always just go for the basic vehicle, but it is fun to sometimes experiment with the other ones, even if they are a bit wacky in their controls. So Air Ride is an alright racing mode with some good tracks and a bit of fun to be had. It just isn't anything mind-blowing or anything. Top Ride, it's fun. I don't find it to be as in-depth as Air Ride, it just feels like I'm playing with toy cars from an overhead view. And for a small distraction, it works very well. But this might be the mode I've spent the most time in, and I do not know why. It just seemed like a safe bet to me when picking this game up. And even after I understood it's probably the least exciting part about this game, its quick nature and chaotic items drag me in every time, which led me to fully complete this game's checklist. Every single one of these modes has its own checklist, with dozens of achievements available that are there so you can get your money's worth out of the game. Many of the achievements are the simplest things, like brushing your hair with a calculator, but given how many of them there are, it takes a long time to get all of them. So yeah, Top Ride is a bit of a guilty pleasure to me, but City Trial, holy pants. Now this is what you call a mode. It's one of the most thrilling things in Kirby, let alone any video game I've ever played. City Trial is why people talk about this game. It is a near perfect facet of this game that is a blast with friends, and is honestly up there with Mario Party in terms of party-based deities. This mode drops you into a small open area in order to power yourself up for a randomly given challenge at the end of the game. Sometimes you're given a hint as to what it is, and sometimes you're not. So the best thing you can do is try to build yourself up to be the best overall racer, in order to prepare for what awaits you as a challenge. There are so many stats to try and build up, and you aren't even given a whole lot of time to explore it in the first place, so you better make it count. You never know what you're going to get as a challenge or what stat upgrades you'll bump into. Overall, it's one heck of a mode, and I'll be sure to praise it even more until I die in 60 to 80 years. So this is a good game with great modes, but that isn't even why I'm talking about this game. It's because this is the only Kirby game on the GameCube, which is something that still baffles me. The GameCube had almost every Nintendo franchise under the sun, so for it not to have a mainline Kirby game was rather strange. However, it was shown to be in production at some point, but it was scrapped and only sought for some influence and returned to Dreamland. But we're not there yet, so we're gonna have to talk about my most controversial opinion. Kirby and the Amazing Mirror is my least favorite Kirby game, because you knew it wasn't going to be block ball. This game is the only Kirby game that I have not gone through and beaten, because I don't want to give it the satisfaction. This is one of the most frustrating things I've laid my eyes on, and I hate the fact of simply putting it into the GBA. But honestly, it could have been good. There could have been so many things done to make it anything but a disappointing conception. It just never worked out in the end, and was the biggest letdown I felt from a game in recent years. This is more of a love it or hate it situation, and while I was initially appealed at the prospect of an open world Kirby game in the style of a Metroidvania, the execution of it all, it sucks. I was excited when I got this game, and I was expecting to play it all the way through, having fun with the world and getting lost in the experience. Well, I got lost alright. If this game was supposed to be a Metroidvania, no. Metroidvanias have you exploring in order to find items that make you stronger and help you progress in the game. This game could have had you collecting copy abilities in place of upgrades, collecting them like you do in Milky Way Wishes, and only certain copy abilities should make it for certain doors. It would give a reason for you to explore the world, to make yourself stronger. This game doesn't do that. First of all, the abilities you get are just from normal enemies. You can swallow and receive them every time, which is already a missed opportunity. And what they do instead is try to block your path with some random blocks that can only be destroyed by certain abilities, so you have to backtrack and try to find an ability that would destroy them. And most of the time, the abilities in the blocks aren't even close to each other, which just makes it a pain because this happens so many times in the game that I honestly think it's ridiculous. It's why I haven't beaten this game, because that's all it is. It's just going back and forth between a blocked path and some random ability. For the first few hours I spent in the game, it never stopped. I just got to the point where I couldn't handle it anymore. It isn't a hard game per se, but because the same thing happens so much, it grows to be tedious. Yeah, I was fine with biting my fingernails, but then I realized there were 10 of them. And they couldn't even go for a half-decent reason to explore, because the chests, the only reward you're actually given for exploration outside of the main adventure, they are useless. Most of them just give you some random health items, not even health boosts in order to make yourself stronger in the long term. No, just some temporary health items. But apparently, there are permanent health upgrades in the deep recesses of this game's world, but people also say the Sasquatch is real. I don't really know what to believe anymore. This game really wants to act like it's a Metroidvania with blocked off pathways in a large open world, but it just muddles it by not following through. These chests aren't important, and you can go for the entire game without really collecting any of them. Again, why not make the chests into copy essences? It would make exploring for the abilities fun, because when you get each one, you should feel like so many more paths in the world have opened up. That's why people enjoy games like Metroid Dread, because you start with practically nothing, and you have to build yourself up to gain strength with health, missiles, and other upgrades. But sometimes the chests can have cosmetic items that can change Kirby's color or have some extra goodie that someone might find appealing. Do you think I find them appealing? Go on, give me your honest opinion. There are also a few other things that make this game even more than frustrating, like how if you get only hit once, your ability flies off. Not only is this hard to deal with, but it also adds to my frustration with going through the game, because if you're on your way to break down a door that can only be broken with some abilities, and you lose the ability you need, it means you have to go back and retrieve the ability again, which isn't all too easy, because sometimes you find yourself going through a path that you can only go forward through, not backwards, so you practically have to make a circle through several rooms just to get your ability back, and you might screw it up again, so what's the point? And a reason I have so much trouble getting back to the ability I need is because the map looks like it's made of toothpicks and Elmer's glue. Smells like it too. I didn't even know there was a map for quite a while, mostly because I'm daft, I get it. But even when I did discover the map, I spent more time trying to decipher it than anything, because it's too simple for any real use. This is my least favorite Kirby game, but it could have been good. With the stuff that's already there, aside from the muddled execution, some of the new abilities are really nice, the soundtrack is fine enough, and the graphics are quite appealing for a game on the GBA. And it could have been a lot better if they just made slight tweaks to the gameplay, like adding more detail to the map, replacing treasures with something that actually matters, and giving a substantial reason to explore the game. It's the only Kirby game where you're free to explore a wide area with multiple sections that interlock. And when I first started playing, all of this excited me, but my opinion of the game slowly soured throughout my playthrough. But it almost feels like the game pushed aside the fundamental basics of game design in favor of trying to turn Kirby into something it isn't. You can't just make a big open world based off of the Kirby template. There are things that need to be changed in order for the concept to work. Kirby and the Amazing Mirror, to me, it's just a missed opportunity. It's misguided, troubled, and probably needs some counseling. This is the most critical I'll really get of any Kirby game, because with Dreamland 2, while it was a bit on the boring side, it introduced some faulty mechanics. At the very least, it worked. Amazing Mirror tries to squish the Kirby formula from that of past games into an environment where it can only work in certain contexts. This game was partially developed by Flagship, a subsidiary of Capcom, and they would go on to make another game in the Kirby series for the DS, although not with the same open world style. I wasted a whole birthday wish making sure of that. Kirby Squeak Squad is a game. That doesn't explain the rants. And it's a fine game too, it just isn't gonna bring upon world peace, but I can at least say I liked it more than Amazing Mirror, but I can also say that about Taxes. What bugs me though is that I just played this game, and I thought it was well designed and fun for the time in which I was playing it, but I can't remember anything about the game itself. Kirby was there were mice, and I don't know, grass. This might be a good Kirby game, but it is woefully forgettable. It has practically the same engine as Amazing Mirror, and there isn't anything this game adds that isn't in previous titles. This is the most basic and generic game in the whole series. It's the exact formula that comes to mind when Kirby enters the conversation. It doesn't do anything new or important, the game just exists. As an example of how odd the game is, just look at the story. Kirby's eating a cake until it is stolen, and he is determined to get it back. Along the way, he harasses Dedede and goes after some random chest thinking it's his cake, until eventually it's revealed that it's actually a dark and evil entity. This ticks off all of the boxes of what you'd expect with the Kirby plot, and it just makes it look so boring compared to the other scenarios that transpired in previous games. At a point, it doesn't even feel like you're going through the game just to get a piece of cake. Probably because this is one of the most lackluster motivations I've ever been put through in a video game. For most of the game, Dreamland isn't in danger. There's nothing pushing you to go fast aside from maybe a stale cake. There are no stakes in the plot until the very end. The only reason Dreamland is eventually put in danger is that one of the rats opened a chest and it happened to be an evil chest. It isn't a bad plot, but it surely is an abhorrent story, while being a nagging afterthought as you make your way through generic landscapes. Which, yeah, the levels in this game are fine, but I don't think they care about them because there was nothing distinct about their theming. You can make the best level of a video game ever, but if it looks like you went to the generic texture store and placed its contents onto it, nobody would care. Speaking of which, I should head over to Walmart. I mean, Great Value's always in stock. The soundtrack reinforces what the game stands for to me. Every song fits its surrounding atmosphere. They're inoffensive, but they aren't great at sticking in your head. For a franchise of some of the most memorable soundtracks in Nintendo history, it's fair to say that this encapsulates the idea that this game has nothing to say. It almost feels like Flagship looked at Hal's work on the series and tried to copy it verbatim, without adding any other ingredients. I found the paprika. Even Amazing Mirror got creative every once in a while, and for that, it gets a point against Squeak Squad. Enjoy it while it lasts, bub. And believe it or not, not, the treasures in the game are actually cool and useful. In Amazing Mirror, upgrading your health and changing Kirby's color was the farthest it went. This game gives you a few more things to mess around with, like an extra stage, a brand new power-up, and it also allows you to add more moves to an ability's arsenal. It isn't that much more, but it gives you more of a reason to go out and look for them. It almost feels like the treasures in these games would have gone a lot better with Amazing Mirror, because the entire point of that game was getting you to explore new territory and venture out to discover chests. While Squeak Squad's goal isn't even close to that, I actually want to collect the chests in this game. They aren't overly hard or convoluted to get. You can just do a bit of poking around the level, and chances are you'll stumble into quite a few. They aren't perfect, they do take up space in your belly inventory, which is just a place where you store items, and it's also here to meet Nintendo's touchscreen use code. They probably have it up on their wall. And sometimes a member of the Squeak Squad will try to take it from you, but I really put emphasis on trying this circumstance. So what I'm trying to say is, the game's alright, and it only took 791 words to get there. It doesn't inspire me to get up and face the day, but I'll play it if I'm in the mood. However, I don't find much of a reason to go back to it. The chests are decent collectibles, the graphics are nice, and the levels are well designed, but I can say that about 90% of Kirby's catalog. There isn't anything done here that I can't get anywhere else. I mean, there's a new metal ability, it isn't good. Flagship only developed 2 Kirby games, and while I'd say this is the better of the two, I feel like they actually tried something with Amazing Mirror. It might not have been something good, but it was a different kind of genre that Kirby had never gone into and hasn't gone into since. Squeak Squad is the anti-Amazing Mirror. They may have been developed by the same people, but they both take completely different directions with their style of gameplay, collectibles, creativity, quality. Squeak Squad is a good game, but the fact that it's so generic and vanilla makes it all the more fitting to take place in the weird era of Kirby. But the last game in this era is a Wii game, releasing a bit before the series to make its full comeback on the same system. Kirby's Epic Yarn is one of the best Kirby games. Even though it technically isn't a Kirby game, it isn't a spin-off in the same sense as Air Ride. No, that game was completely different. It was a whole other genre. This game plays very similarly to a standard Kirby game, but they tweak some things just a bit to make it anything but that. This game was developed by Good Feel, and unlike Flagship, I can sing its praises for hours on end. My friends and family tell me to stop, but I don't think they've even played Wario Land Shake It. They have no right to tell me their opinions. Because Good Feel has made some incredible games, and they've also dabbled in the field of others on occasion. Even though they only managed to wrangle up a Kirby game this one time, they sure made the most of it because this might be one of their best works. If you couldn't tell, this game is a very peculiar art style. Everything is made of arts and crafts materials. It's a very interesting direction to take the game, but it works. However, they do so much with the basic concept of everything being made from crafts. It plays into the mechanics of some levels, it affects Kirby's moveset in ways that I'll explain soon enough, and it adds a lot of charm to just about everything. The game's art style reflects the creativity that the developers put around every corner. Some of the landscapes are downright pretty and are backed up wonderfully by the majestic score. The game's soundtrack doesn't go for the normal Kirby funk, instead appealing to soft instruments, which means my recorder ain't gonna cut it. And the levels are great. They have so many layers to them, and I could honestly go on for hours talking about how good they are, but it doesn't mean I should. The art style adds a lot to this game, not just because it looks nice, but because the developers do so many fun things with it, as it affects the game's core musically and mechanically. Even Kirby's made of yarn, which apparently limits his natural abilities like inhaling enemies, and that's fine because at least he can turn into a car while he runs. Yes, the only logical step you can take if you're turned into string. But in place of copy abilities, we have these sections of the levels where you can transform into whatever the game feels like that day. And they have a nice variety to them while being fun to control. Now it does take a little bit out of the Kirby formula, but it's like if I removed one of the items on my shelf and replaced it with butter. Nobody would care. Kirby also has this whip attack as his main form of assault, but it can also be used for quite a few other things like solving puzzles and uncovering the game's treasures. Speaking of the treasures, why did they use the same collectible for 3 games in a row? Because why not? The butter still has a few minutes left. This game takes things at a slower pace as you try to collect a massive hoard of beads and scour the level for any secrets. The treasures themselves are good. They give you some furniture to place in your apartment, because this game really makes me feel like I'm in my early 20s working a dead-end job, getting excited over the most minuscule things like a clock. But the slow pace of the game was criticized back in the day when people cared about the difficulty of their Kirby games. Now people just accept the fact that Kirby is an easy franchise. Even the homeless man down the street knows it, and he doesn't even know who Wario is. Personally, I'm fine with the lack of difficulty as well as the slower pace, which is why I don't like some of the optional challenges they throw at you. They aren't important, they aren't fun, and they also don't matter. It feels like it's throwing difficulty into a game that isn't difficult for the sake of difficulty. I got them all once in order to achieve 100% completion, but never again will I play hide and seek with whatever this thing is. There was a remake for the 3DS, Well, now I have something to complain about. Whose idea was this? Taking a game that practically relies on its art style and spanking it onto an inferior system that happens to be on its deathbed isn't very appealing. Or at least that's what the voices in my head keep telling me. Nintendo made several 3DS ports near the end of the system's life, and I can forgive most of them because they did add things that made them on par with the originals. This game doesn't add anything aside from a heaping dose of disappointment. It doesn't change anything in a good way, and while it did include a few new features, they made the game worse. I don't like this remake, so let me symbolize that by replacing this butter with used deodorant. This is a great game. Despite the fact that it does nothing extraordinary, it's hard to come up with something that I don't like about this game. I didn't mention it earlier, but the story and dialogue are incredible.
This grass feels funny, Kirby thought. It feels like pants.
Depending on who you ask. The game's art style really carries it for me. I always find it interesting to see how it's integrated into the gameplay. At first glance, it isn't all too much, but when I got into the game, it became so much fun to traverse the levels, interacting with their yarn-based mechanics. And with that, the weird era of Kirby comes to a close. And thank God! Only one of the games was unenjoyable to me, but this time frame as a whole didn't bring anything interesting to Kirby's formula. Nothing even felt substantial enough to be considered a main entry in the series. Air Ride was a racing game, Amazing Mirror was Amazing Mirror, Squeak Squad was too basic to be even slightly memorable, and Epic Yarn was a completely different take on the formula. And so, after a decade of waiting for a return to form for the series, Nintendo gave us a miracle. At least it isn't a pentagon. Kirby's Dreamland was the start of something special, because after the mediocrity of the 2000s, Kirby came back more refined than he's ever been. I'd go as far as to say that this was the best Kirby game at the time of its release. It released on the Wii, and I expected it to have some sort of shoehorn gimmicks that would make use of the motion controls in a way that feels contrived and forced. But aside from inhaling extremely large blocks, which don't come up all too often, as well as a few abilities, it doesn't really do any of that junk. It's nice that even though Nintendo is probably dying to do it, they let this game be as traditional can be. But it isn't like they added absolutely nothing new to the game. Then it would just be another Squeak Squad, minus the rats. The abilities in this game complete the concept of what they were trying to do in Superstar. Each ability gives different moves for you to perform, but there are a heck of a lot more options, both in the abilities and the moves you can pull off. It feels like a perfect evolution of what copy abilities were meant to be at the end of the day. Fun. Sure, the old games messed around with their abilities enough to give me a good time, but I'd probably have to make a footnote listing my knowledge of the future. And the new abilities are great. Water always felt like a no-brainer, and I don't know why we weren't given it sooner. Was Nintendo just watching the world burn without water Kirby? I don't know how they survived. And I'm also more surprised that they made Bubble Kirby before this. Squeak Squad might have been a forgettable game, but sometimes I wake up in a cold sweat thinking about Flagship's poor game design choices. There are even some special abilities that grant you passage to breaking your foes' spines without breaking a sweat. That's just lemonade. They're okay, they only come up every once in a while, but it's a nice change of pace. The game is also a lot more puzzle focused than its predecessors, as you can go around hunting for energy spheres. Quite a few are hidden in each level, and they give you access to some extra bonuses and challenges. It isn't much, but it's something that motivates me to collect them, just like how Amazing Mirror motivates me to commit arson. Most of the energy spheres are hidden behind a sort of challenge, and it isn't often tied to an ability if that ability can't be easily found nearby. In previous games, I defeat a mini-boss and pass up its ability because I should treat it like the filth that it is, then I'd go and see a pathway that only that ability can go through, after which I proceed to go through the 5 stages of grief. This game doesn't pull any of that nonsense, and typically plays off of your wits instead of your luck, and even if it does do something in the realm of tomfoolery, it isn't all too much. You can also get the spheres by going through interdimensional portals after each section with a super ability, in which case they're guarded by sphere doomers. For anyone whose weakness is geometry, I'm sorry. The story is interesting though. It starts out with Kirby. I knew it! And a spaceship falls from the sky as it loses its main parts as well as energy spheres. Once crashed, the alien inside, named Maglor, complains how his ship is now fallen apart. My life is falling apart, you don't see me complaining about it. So the main quest is now set in motion. Help the blue alien man. The energy spheres are just randomly laid throughout levels, as I've explained. And the main ship parts are guarded by the bosses. None of them are incredible, but I wouldn't disrespect Mr. Duder. Okay, scratch that thought. The Grand Doomer might be one of my favorite bosses in Kirby history. The fight starts with an obvious fake out, which is probably what's gonna happen when I'm 86 and my monitor flatlines. And we've already gone through several Sphere Doomer fights by this point in the game, as they protect the energy spheres, but the Grand Doomer appears out of nowhere in order to protect the last ship part. I love its location atop the tower you've been climbing, and when you have to use the Ultra Sword to destroy him, it is the most fun I've had with murder in a long time. Then once we obtain all of the ship parts, we can travel to Maglor's home planet, and we get stricken down immediately. Now we have to get to the top of a volcano volcano in order to retrieve a crown from a powerful dragon named Landia, but I prefer to call it Thomas. So, we defeat Thomas, and Maglor betrays us and takes the crown for himself with the goal of eviscerating the universe. Who could have seen this coming? This is my 11th time playing the game. We chase Maglor through space on our very own Thomas, and we destroy him once and for... No, wait. I told you this was a return to form. When all of that's over with, we retreat safely back to Planet Popstar. The end. Gotta say, that was a fine story. It isn't some perfect thing that should be praised eternally, but for a game as simple as Kirby, I really appreciate when the writers actually do their jobs. Now, there is one complaint I do have about the game, although it's more of a nitpick if anything. The environments in the game are basic. I mean, a few of them are cool, and they have really distinct looking backgrounds, but it doesn't get as creative with its locations as future entries do. It doesn't detract from my enjoyment of the game because the levels are so well designed, but it's just why this isn't my favorite 2D Kirby game. Outside of that minute complaint, this game would go on to define the mainline Kirby formula throughout the 2010s. Just like how Air Ride marked a strange point in Kirby's life, Return to Dreamland brings it all to a renaissance. The games from here on out range from good to the best games in the series hands down, and Return to Dreamland should definitely be congratulated for what it did. I was gonna throw it as a surprise party, but I realized I don't have the budget for that kind of thing. I mean, all I have is a chemistry book and a jigsaw puzzle. At least it's something. It isn't the best game in the series, but it is by far the most important, because without it, Kirby would still be rattling on the ground with Flagship. I don't think I could have taken another amazing mirror. I nearly passed out the first time. Kirby Triple Deluxe for the 3DS released soon after, and I find it very difficult to discern if I like this more than Return to Dreamland. These two games are very similar in many ways, but they do have some differences that stand out, like how Triple Deluxe is just a few centimeters long. And the fact that we get such an incredible handheld Kirby game that stands toe-to-toe with the console release was a shock to the system. Have the past few years been a lie? I used to play this game a lot back when it released. I take it everywhere on road trips during the better part of my life, so this game has a point of nostalgia ringing with it. But I won't let the past cloud my judgment. The last time that happened, I lost a game of Monopoly. So, if these games are similar, what reasons can back up that claim? I can think of a couple. It mostly has to do with how Triple Deluxe practically bases itself on the Return to Dreamland template. Triple Deluxe looks just like Return to Dreamland graphically, in a perfect world. Aside from the graphical capabilities of the 3DS being far weaker than the Wii's, they did a really good job making sure this game looked quality. Gameplay wise though, these two are the exact same. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. They have most of the same abilities, with some new ones added and some taken out. The Sunstones are just this game's energy spheres, with the same puzzle and exploratory based gameplay behind them, and they both use the same engine. At most times, Triple Deluxe just feels like more of Return to Dreamland, which is a good thing because the template works. The game is still unbelievably fun to take in, just as much as Return to Dreamland, or even more so. This isn't like a new Super Mario Bros. Situation though, because while similar, Triple Deluxe does make some tweaks to the gameplay that aren't going to redefine what makes a Kirby game, but it does give it its own sense of fashion. But most importantly, the game has a different level select. How could I forget? By forgetting. Okay, I didn't talk about the previous level selects from Air Ride to Return to Dreamland, but that's because what is there to talk about? Air Ride and Amazing Mirror didn't really have a level select. Squeak Squad had one, I think. And Epic Yarns was actually pretty good. I don't know why I didn't mention it. 5.5 out of 7. But Return to Dreamland just copied Adventure. Triple Deluxe feels like you're traversing this 3D environment that's still connected by lines, but it doesn't make it all that interesting to explore, because you can't. But it is a neat concept that deserves points for being functional and original. 5 out of 7. Hypernova is the replacement for super abilities from the last game, and I have to say that this is a much needed improvement. The problem with super abilities was that there wasn't really a puzzle or challenge for you to do. You just mow down enemies and maybe time your attacks once or twice. Hypernova expands on this concept and gives us snow people love, the best kind. I'm only saying that because I've never seen it, but they do some interesting things with it. We're talking about Hypernova here, not snow people love. And instead of it just being a method for committing large-scale homicide, you can also solve all kinds of puzzles with it. The art style is good, even though it looks like someone really thought the audience liked colors. This game is really bright with its art style. Many things go for a pastel coloration, and even when they don't, they do. It looks quite nice at times. It really makes me want to go out of my way to feel bad for the colorblind. And I will say the locations in the game aren't as basic as Return to Dreamland's. But let me put it this way. Wispy Woods doesn't appear in the game, but Flowery Woods does. I can't believe how different this game is. While yes, it is an improvement, it could be better. The sub-games in Triple Deluxe are actually worth mentioning. They were in most of the games we've talked about, but I am going to deny it if you try to swindle me into talking about them. Kirby Fighters is a Smash Bros. Clone that spinned itself into a standalone eShop title, as as well as a sequel for the Switch. And it ain't half bad. It's only a quarter bad. It just doesn't have too much going for it. I mean, if anyone was gonna rip off Super Smash Bros., my first guess would have been Chibi Robo, with Kirby in a good second place. DDD's Drum Dash also got its own eShop title, and I love it so much. It's just a simple rhythm game, but it mixes in elements of platforming while having some great Kirby music to play to, Deluxe especially. These side modes have no right being as good as they are, and the story of the game is at the very least interesting. It might just sound like a fever dream I had the other night, but it was a good fever dream, so I won't complain. Kirby's house gets lifted into the sky by a magic beanstalk, so there's that. And a spider creature violates a couple of ordinances and takes off with King Dedede. Not much happens until the end of the game, when it's revealed that the reason King Dedede was taken was because he was believed to be the hero of Popstar. I'm all for seriousness, but that's hilarious. What kind of research was done that made anyone come to that conclusion? Once that embarrassment is past us, the true villain reveals herself to be Queen Sectonia, and her deal is that she wants to be pretty, so she combines with the beanstalk, turning into a giant flower that Kirby simply disintegrates, which, you know, fair enough. Overall, a good plot. I just like Return to Dreamland a bit more, probably because of the Hell Demon. Triple Deluxe isn't nearly as groundbreaking as Return to Dreamland, but that doesn't mean it isn't just as good as it. I think I still prefer Return to Dreamland, simply because it pulled it off first, but that isn't to disrespect how great this game is. It's better than every Kirby game from both the retro and weird eras of Kirby, but that's probably just me. Triple Deluxe might be a shorter game, but it's tightly packed in a way that's perfect for on-the-go gameplay, and I have so much fond memories of this game. It's one of the cornerstones of my childhood that I put up there with what I'm playing right now, because I'm still going through childhood. How wacky is that? My opinions aren't of value yet. Which is why no one will listen when I tell them that Kirby Planet Robobot is the best 2D Kirby game. I absolutely adore this game, and to this day, it stands as a gold standard for what a Kirby game should be and can be. It's creative, but it doesn't dive off the deep end and try to change what Kirby is. It's the most similar to Return to Dreamland and Triple Deluxe, once again following the same template. Like how many of the abilities and collectibles are drawn over in a gameplay sense. But this game pulls things together a bit differently. I mean, it wasn't going to be one of my favorites because the box was a good coaster for my drink. No, I'm talking about the Robobot armor. This shakes up the gameplay to a bearable level. At the end of the day, it's just a face robot with arms and legs, but so is my psychiatrist. The Robobot armor takes everything good about the super abilities in the Hypernova and smacks it onto a piece of machinery. It's quick and easy to use, like a knife, and is able to cut through enemies like butter. Like a knife. Each ability can consume has quite a few tricks it can get up to, making it look like the animal buddies were never cool enough. Probably because they weren't. But I just really like how they made the Robobot armor such a large part of the game. You don't just use it in one section of the level, you can use it in several, like a knife. Unlike if the super abilities in the Hypernova were stretched throughout the game, the Robobot armor can live through it because it has so much potential for being the key to solving many puzzles, as well as it being a gimmick that hardly gets dry, seeing as how the game correctly balances it with the standard Kirby attire. I neglected to mention it in Triple Deluxe, but it also has a secondary collectible in the form of keychains. They were purely cosmetic and didn't play into the game in any way, shape, or form, aside from their existence. But I do appreciate the fan service they were able to give through it. Robobot does a very similar thing, but instead choosing to go with stickers. They're the same thing, but with Robobot, you can put them on your armor, giving the mechanic purpose. However, the real reason this is the best 2D Kirby game is its general theming. Everything in this game is mechanized, but it's more than that, because every location of the game is so much more distinct than usual. The mechanized theming gives the opportunity for the game to make something new and cool, and put it around every corner. In practically all of the past games, I would expect to meet up with the same typical video gamey locations. In this game, I can build up my gambling addiction, like mine isn't already at an all-time high. You get to visit bustling cities with Waddle Dees driving cars around, ice cream factories, casinos. This game is really creative with its locations, even when it isn't trying to exploit the fact that even the generic landscapes are littered with mechanical parts. Do you remember when I compared Return to Dreamland's Wispy Woods to Triple Deluxe's Flowery Woods? Yeah, well this game has clanky woods. Aside from being one letter away from comedy, this is exactly what I wanted to see from previous games. And the story does a lot to explain why everything is so mechanized. As the Haltman Works Company descends onto Popstar while Kirby is asleep, you ever just take a nap and wake up to your whole planet being enslaved while being drained of natural resources? Yeah, I hate it when that happens. With the goal being obvious, we go and try to stop the bad guys. I can't believe it. And when we get to be around halfway through the game, we meet Susie, the executive assistant who explains that the goal of the Haltman Works Company is simply eternal prosperity. But in order to achieve that goal, the inhabitants of the land need to be extinguished. And once the end of the game arrives, the boss of the Haltman Works Company tries to stop Kirby, but that never really works out for anyone. Afterwards, he attempts to activate Stardream, a powerful supercomputer with wish-granting capabilities, but he's thwarted by Susie, who wants to sell Stardream for a high price. Although even even that plan is thwarted when Stardream deems all organic life to be a threat and sets off to accomplish his goal. So the game takes the most logical step and turns the Robobot armor into Meta Knight's halberd ship to make for a very interesting final boss. And going off how most of the game orbits around this gimmick of the Robobot armor, it's quite fitting that it would also end off the game. I just don't think any sane person would have had this in mind. But whatever, he goes down just as easily as any other being who threatens the universe's existence, all damage is hereby reversed, and the game ends off happily. I love to remember how we went from a penguin stealing food to this. That says the true evolution of the franchise right there. But because the level select is copied from Triple Deluxe, I can say how odd the sub-games are. Team Kirby Clash is an action RPG where you level up Kirby and his team of different abilitied heroes while warding off typical bosses. You even got Thomas in on this one. You got a follow-up on both the 3DS and Switch, both being free to play, but also riddled with microtransactions. All of these are fine. The action RPG style fits Kirby surprisingly well, but the microtransactions are probably only work in a Wario game because it just comes off as greedy. Kirby 3D Rumble is a high score based game where you do your normal Kirby business in a simplistic 3D environment. As you can expect, it also got an eShop title. Both of these sub-games are up to snuff with Triple Deluxe, and I might have considered them to be better if I didn't have an unfair bias towards DDD's Drum Dash. All in all, this is the ultimate 2D Kirby package. It fixes all of my complaints with Return to Dreamland and Triple Deluxe, which were already the best games in the series. I don't know if there was actually much to improve on from where this game stands in quality. I admit that this is the pinnacle of 2D Kirby games, and it can't really get better from here. But the next game can at least try, even if it doesn't want to. Kirby Star Allies is... You know, next to a bad game of Connect 4, I can't think of anything scarier than this. Except for Yellow Pentagons, I still need to let that one go. This is a very conflicting game. On the one hand, it's good. On the other hand, it isn't perfect. And this isn't like a Dreamland 3 situation where even though it has its flaws, it still manages to be a great game. No, this game is just underwhelming. After knocking it out of the park 3 times in a row, this game feels like even more of a stumble for the franchise. It is once again in the style of Return to Dreamland, which is already more disappointing than my conception, because many other franchises went all out and embraced the newness and intrigue that the Switch provided. This game just did what worked previously. It isn't daring and it doesn't change much. The main hook this time around is that you can make friends. Well, it's good to know the game fits under the fantasy genre. Making friends in this game is an alright concept, but it does nothing but hurt the game design. You can let most of them do the fighting for you, and when in an easy game, it gives you the ability to sit back and relax because your friends have it covered, it makes me question what the game designers were thinking. The ability combinations from 64 return, but they don't really, as your options are very limited. It doesn't get as creative as it does in that game. Here it's just fire sword, water sword, lightning sword. You get these when your friends power you up with their abilities. And while it is a nice way of working the combinations into the main basis of the game's gimmick, I'm no stranger to forgetting that it was even a thing. There are even these sections of the levels where everyone comes together to use the power of friendship in order to commit to transportation that's less costly to the environment. But this mechanic falls flat because while it should feel like your partners are working as a team, one player just tells the others to sit back while they do all the work. It feels more like a school group project than anything. The main gimmicks of the past few games felt more like side elements that were balanced out with the standard Kirby gameplay. The friends in this game aren't like that. They never leave and are always an integral part of the game that is impossible to forget about. Now, it doesn't anger me, it doesn't ruin the game, but if I had the choice between a cool mech suit or CPUs that do all the work for you, do you really think I'm gonna go for the one where I'm most likely to file a restraining order? Because I already filed a few after someone told me they liked Amazing Mirror. But the friend gimmick is most likely there to reinforce the multiplayer focused gameplay. This game has a mission to make the player go out and find some friends, because that's the only way I got a decent amount of enjoyment out of this game. The levels are so dumbed down that when going through the story mode by yourself, you can notice how absolutely bare most of them are. Sure, they look nice, but so does a pack of Chips Ahoy until you realize it's empty. This game might be fun in multiplayer, but that comes at the cost of the tight and quick puzzle-solving platforming that we got from the past 2 games. There isn't even a main collectible to grab. The energy spheres, sunstones, and code cubes all blended together in my mind because of how similar they all were mechanically. But the solution isn't to remove an integral part of what makes the levels interesting to explore. It just makes the game mindless, resulting in one of the easiest games I've ever played. I've had more trouble chewing my food than I got in this game's hardest levels. The story is that dark hearts are raining down from the sky, which are corrupting the inhabitants of Dreamland. I swear I've seen this before. That's the premise you're given from the start, and I definitely have my opinions. This isn't a good setup at all. In Triple Deluxe, we had to climb a beanstalk, Robobot had the whole planet mechanized, and Return to Dreamland could be forgiven because it was the first real Kirby game on a console in more than a decade. This game has no excuse. It does get a bit more interesting as it goes along. You see a dark fortress and even the depths of outer space, but this game doesn't really have any underlying theme to get behind, and the locations feel more like typical levels than creative concepts. I like the autumn leaves in this level, but remember how Robobot had so many ideas for its level themes, which made each one fun to traverse? And remember how this game has none of that? The game's ending is slightly interesting. You defeat a crazy maniac who then sacrifices himself in order to resurrect a Dark Lord, and Why couldn't the rest of the game been like this? The final boss is actually cool, and he isn't mindlessly easy. It takes thought to take the thing down. You even get to venture inside of it and destroy its heart from the inside. Now this game and series as a whole has some deep lore that isn't shown on the surface and is something that I won't go over today or most likely ever. But what I will say is that at least the final moments of this game left a lasting impression on me because I've been really looking forward to not complaining about something. And now, back to complaining. This game really doesn't do much to impress me, but not only does the game do nothing special, it does nothing special for only 5 hours. This game is short, and I'm not even 6 feet tall. The game has only 4 worlds, and if you know what you're doing, you can beat it in no time at all. Even if you go through all of the extra modes, at the most, this game will take up 10 hours of your time, which isn't much. I don't complain about game length that often, but when there's more content in the 3DS games than there is here, I really consider dialing my lawyer. But there were free updates to the game that added new friends to play with from past games. It's a really cool way for each mainline game in the series to get representation in this game, as each of these friends spout references through the moves they can perform. It added a lot of replay value to the game, going through and seeing what each of them had to offer. There was even a new mode added to the game where you could go through a couple of well-designed levels that are actually a decent challenge. Finally, something worth celebrating. I've been waiting for an excuse not to feel miserable, even though it isn't that long and it doesn't have very interesting theming. Ah, fiddlesticks. But I still like the mode. It even has its own collectible to go for, which is something I was clamoring for in the main game. But I still think these free updates that were finished almost a year after the game's release were too little too late. I appreciate that they tried to make up for the lack of content in the story mode with something that feels like it took thought and effort, but by the time the updates were released, the game was beyond saving. Now the game isn't bad, probably because of its 6 out of 7 level select, but also because this game is still rooted from the formula that Return to Dreamland started. Its basic gameplay still works because it worked in previous games. The level designs aren't bad, they're just simple. The friend gimmick doesn't ruin the game, it just isn't as good as what other games in this era had to offer. And this is the end of the Renaissance era of Kirby. At least for now. We haven't gotten another game in this style, which is fine because I feel that Star Allies, more than anything, just showed that this formula could only give so much good before it feels dry. It lasted us a good decade, but it was clear that it had run its course and the franchise should make way for something new. And in September of 2021, finally, WarioWare Get It Together released. But in all seriousness, Kirby in the Forgotten Land is a big deal. This is the first mainline 3D title in the Kirby series. Aside from the fact that they should have done this 22 years prior, this was very exciting to think about. It was nice that Kirby was finally getting his own Switch game that went for a drastic change for the good. It just needed to get Star Allies out of its system in order to do that. So the game was released in March, and what do I think of it? It's no masterpiece, but I think it'd be lying if I said it wasn't. Kirby runs like a dream in 3D, and mine are pretty weird, so take that as you will. The levels in this game are more akin to Super Mario 3D World, where you're set in a linear path to get to the end of the stage, but you do have the ability to get off the beaten path and explore for secrets. And Kirby fits really well with this style, and 3D in general. I think Kirby actually works better as a 3D game than it does a 2D one. In 3D, there are so many more options for puzzles and challenges with the abilities, and the abilities in this game are the best they've ever been. There aren't too many of them, but that's because all of them are worked to perfection in order to be of use in 3D. None of them feel out of place or unhelpful. There's a good reason to use each of them in different circumstances, and as a result, I grew to care for all of them. You can even upgrade the abilities, and you know what that means? New hats! So Kirby made the jump to 3D really well, but that says nothing about what the rest of the game does to excite me. For one thing, the waddle-dees are now integral to the gameplay, and my livelihood is better as a result. Waddle-dees are the main collectible in the game, and I'd say they're the best ones the series has on offer, and that isn't just because they're adorable. Many of them are spread throughout the levels, hidden behind puzzles, and while the puzzles are great and the waddle-dees do their job there, it isn't why it's such a great collectible, because you can also get them by completing missions that are specific to each level, and you aren't given the missions until you either fulfill its conditions accidentally, or the game gives it to you if you don't manage to find it on your own. And instead of missing one of the missions feeling like this horrible thing you want to avoid, I want to miss a mission, so I can have an excuse to go back through levels again because they're so well designed. The main hub of the game, Waddle Dee Town, grows over time as you collect more Waddle Dees. There are quite a few attractions to call a time waster here, and most act as what you would find in the sub-menu of a typical Kirby game. The Waddle Dees serve a great purpose in this game, and significantly increase my enjoyment and satisfaction with the game itself. But there's more to the game than just that. No, there isn't. How could you possibly have a thought like that? Like Traffic Cone Kirby. Okay, you got me there. This game introduces mouthful mode, a method of calorie intake we haven't caught on to yet. Kirby can swallow various objects in order to inherit their abilities, and this isn't like the copy abilities where you can perform all of these incredible moves and combos. This is more like a tamer version of the capture mechanic from Super Mario Odyssey. I really like this mechanic. While there aren't too many of them, none of them feel drawn out or stale by the end of the game, and all of them control well. I mean, how were you gonna mess up the controls for a flight of stairs? Mouthful mode plays a very similar role to the robot armor, because you'll be using it for a decent portion portion of the game. I have no complaints about this. I don't think it's the best gimmick the series has gone for, but I'm probably never going to look at a traffic cone the same way ever again, so I can at least say the game left an impact on me. But my favorite part of the game, like Robobot, is its theming. This was the first 3D Kirby game. They didn't have to go all out like this, but I have a certain criteria where if I can go to a shopping mall in a desert wasteland at the same time, I have to acknowledge that the game is beyond art and words, so I'm gonna try charades now. This game is really fun to go through simply because of the atmosphere it exudes. This game goes for a post-apocalyptic turn with its direction, which could have led to the same theme being reused in levels, with it getting stale after a while. But no, every level introduces something new and adds to the theme rather than reusing it. I especially love the snow world. Its architecture is intriguing and the locations it brings you to, well, there go the charades. I'm not a huge fan of desert worlds in games, because what interesting things can you do with a desert? There's sand and maybe a cactus sometimes. But this is the best desert level I've ever seen in a video game. So if there was ever a best desert level in a game award, this one gets my vote. The game manages to turn even the worst and most generic video game environments into something creative and full of life. Even the story is bonkers. Oh wait, I just got a message from the Gary Wilson. He says he hasn't beaten the story yet and he doesn't want it to spoil it for him. Who plays Kirby games for the plot? The game starts out with a peaceful day in Dreamland, until it isn't and Kirby gets sucked into a hole in the sky, and he finds himself in a completely different world. He goes on to befriend a flying elf creature with what I can presume is a bite taken out of his ear, until he's stolen by the one and only King Dedede about halfway through the game. And the end of the game is absolutely wild. It turns out the tiny blue thing was really just one part of a larger whole of this ultimate life form. This whole business is controlled by Leongar, and while we defeat him and a giant gooey mass that chases us through a hallway, probably turning away a lot of the claustrophobia fans out there, the ultimate life form is eventually successfully produced, even though it's destroyed soon after because Kirby runs a truck straight through him. Great stuff. But now that the Forgotten Land is colliding with Popstar, the blue flying thing sacrifices itself to save the day, but not really because it comes back in record time. Now this is just a base level explanation of the plot. I could go a lot deeper if I found the motivation, but there was a fine story, and there was even a post game where you could go to save Leongar. Neat. This is my favorite Kirby game, and that isn't just the new Switch game jitters talking. That should have worn off by last week. This game juggled the tasks of both converting Kirby to a new dimension while also standing on its own merits of quality, and it does both of those two things wonderfully, while injecting some much needed excitement into a franchise that hasn't received it since it came back to the consoles an entire decade ago. This game does nearly everything it should, and it might not be a perfect game, but for introducing the next era of Kirby, it pulls off that job better than I had ever anticipated. And that should just about do it. I've talked about every mainline entry in the Kirby series. It was a fun ride going from the retro era, where Kirby was just finding his footing, to the weird era, where the franchise acted like that one kid who licked his shoe for no reason, and then to its renaissance, where it started out great, and then kept going until it wasn't. Kirby in the Forgotten Land was great too. After so many years of begging Nintendo to do it, they finally gave us people who have little aspirations in life exactly what we wanted. I might talk about the spin-offs of this franchise one of these days. Who knows, I might get bored. But after going for every single mainline game in the series, I can say that without a doubt, this is one of the best franchises Nintendo has on their holster. You know, after an hour and 20 minutes of babbling, I forgot why I even started talking about Kirby in the first place. Huh. Well, I was right. A bad game of Connect 4 is way scarier.